Hello and welcome to Two Beers Till Takeoff, the podcast inspired by conversations overheard at the airport bar. Join Phil as he grabs a couple of beers and chats with interesting people from around the world, sharing expert knowledge and hilarious stories that you won't find in your guidebook. So pull up a stool and get ready for an adventure as we explore worlds of travel and beyond with Two Beers Till Takeoff.
4 hours in a Taliban headquarters.
I had dog meat in Laos.
Was it golden retriever?
Smack a dirty old smooch on our beautiful fish right here.
He didn't die, but he fell down the side of the mountain.
Hello and welcome to Happy Hour. My name is Phil, and my guest today is a travel writer from the UK who lives in Manchester and travels on assignment for publications including BBC, National Geographic, and Lonely Planet. Recent travel experiences have included eating deadly blowfish in Japan, staying in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Scotland, and going behind the scenes of the debauched masquerades of the Venice Cat Carnival. He now hosts a podcast highlighting interesting food and drink from around the world called Hungry Ghosts. Music fans, you won't want to miss this because at the end of the episode, he and I will be doing our top 5 best grunge songs. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
What's going on, buddy?
Not a lot, mate. Just, I think, in a similar boat to you, a little bit tender after a few beers last night, but holding it together.
Like a pro. Like a pro.
Yeah.
So right off the top, Dan, you're from Manchester. So Manchester's known for having, I guess, 2 great football clubs. Arguably, you could arguably say that depending who you're talking to.
Depends who you ask, yeah. 1 or 2.
Yeah, being the first industrialized city in the world and being the home of the Gypsy King, Tyson Fury,
That's
Michael
right.
Bisping, the band Oasis, and the GOAT from An Idiot Abroad, Carl Picklington. Can you tell us a bit more about the city and maybe some of your favorite spots?
Sure. Yeah, so, like you say, it's a city with a huge amount of history. The first industrialized city in the world, so there's all these amazing, a lot of the best bars that you find in the city nowadays have been repurposed from like old cotton mills and old sort of industrial buildings. So there's a whole district of the city called Ancoats, which is famous for sort of bars like that. And then there's the Northern Quarter as well, which is also sort of old industrial buildings. So yeah, those are sort of, in terms of areas, those places are really cool. There's an amazing bar called Refuge, which is in like a really old hotel. It's like all sort of covered with like ceramic tiled walls and stuff, and it's very Victorian sort of vibe. And that's a great place to go for a drink. It's a great night out, Manchester. It's you mentioned Oasis. Like if you hate Oasis, then you should probably swerve Manchester because every other pub you go into, you'll have someone will be, strumming away, singing Wonderwall.
Guaranteed to hear. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. They're very proud of their music up here. So Oasis being one example, the Smiths as well, of course, Stone Roses. It's a very creative city. There's a lot going on, and it's a fun place to live.
Nice. I'm really interested, I guess, in the price of beer. The beer price index for me is something that I look at before I go somewhere. Like recently, I just went to Las Vegas, and I've realized that, if you buy a beer on the strip, it's going to cost you a shit ton of money. It's around $15 to $20, in a casino. How much does a beer run you in Manchester?
Well, not quite $15 to $20, but it's more than it used to be, that's for sure. So, but I'd reckon, so on average, probably, if you're in that kind of like trendier sort of bar, you're probably looking at £5, £5 or £6 for a pint. Down in London now, you're getting like £7 beers, which is insane. But
deadly.
Yeah, absolutely. Somewhere around that. If you go out to sort of quieter parts of the city, then or like less kind of desirable areas, let's say, then you can find a pub with like a flat. Well, you probably don't know. This is like an English archetype of like a sort of slightly dodgy pub. They have a flat roof. They always have like a pub dog, and they have sort of some slightly like threatening looking characters hanging around. You might be looking at £4 there, but somewhere around there.
Nice. So I guess are you a football fan? You support City or United?
Yeah, I'm a United fan. for better or worse.
Nice.
So, have been all my life, even since before I moved up to Manchester. But I've got some family connections in Northern England, and but yeah, obviously recent years, City have sort of taken trophy wise. They sort of been in the ascendancy, but we'll see. They might be about to get done for financial what's the word, irregularities. So hopefully they'll get brought down a peg or two, but we'll see about that. But yeah, it's an amazing place to be a football fan. But yeah, Old Trafford.
Yeah, it's great to have two kind of teams, right? So it creates a bit of that rivalry in the city. So it sounds like I'd love to go and kind of experience that. It sounds really cool.
Yeah, for sure. And like Man United are getting better now again, so it's a bit more competitive. There was a few years back there where it was a bit it was tough going as a United fan, but hopefully in the ascendancy again.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
So I want to kind of get into a bit more of your work. So when did you realize that you wanted to be a writer?
Well, I think when I realized I wanted to be a writer, I mean, funnily enough, we're going to talk about bands later on. When I was a teenager, I wanted to be in a band, like, you know, how original, but that was my dream when I was a kid. And I think I got to like when I left university, and it's like, well, I need to make some money now, make a living. I think I just realised, well, not much was happening with that, and so writing had always been the thing that I was best at. So the only thing really that I was good at school and stuff. And so whether or not I wanted to be a writer, I think deep down I probably knew that I would always have been a writer. But then I did my share of jobs, which involved writing in some way, but they weren't very kind of writerly, if you like. So I worked in sort of as a copywriter for like doing marketing in the travel industry when I lived in London. And then, but I didn't, I was sitting in this office in London, pissing down with the rain outside, writing about these amazing places where all these rich people were going on holiday. And I wanted to actually get to do some traveling. So, yeah, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here, answering questions you haven't asked yet. But yeah.
Hey, that's fine, man.
So I started freelancing, writing articles on the side. And one of the people I was writing for was a company called Rough Guide, so like a British guidebook company.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really thinking about doing guidebooks at all, but then one day my editor at Rough Guides emailed me and said, "What are you doing for the next couple of months? Because we've got a space to update a guidebook in Indonesia." And I was about to pack it all in and go traveling anywhere. I'd saved up money and stuff like that, and so I just jumped at the chance really, and not looked back since then really.
I kind of want to touch on that bit where you get to update the rough guides and the different guidebooks. But before that, I kind of want to still lead up to that. So sure. You have a master's in South Asian area studies. Mm-hmm. So what led you to dedicate your study to this region?
Well, I mean, I've always been kind of a little bit niche in what I've chosen to study, I would say, because I was actually going way back to when I was at school. I was really lucky. We had a very unusual opportunity when we were at school, which was when we were doing our GCSEs, which is like the exams you do when you're like 16. Our school did, so every school does like a religious studies one, which is like a general one, but our one was quite unusual that we did one just purely in Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And so that really sparked, because I was never that interested in like Christianity or the more sort of like Western face of religion, but I was always, that sparked an interest in Buddhism, Hinduism, and kind of South Asian culture, let's say. So my undergrad which was in Manchester, was comparative religion and social anthropology, which is obviously a bit of a mouthful, but also pretty like I say, pretty niche. Like lots of people, it's the kind of thing when I was doing it and people say, "What are you doing?" and I told them that, you get a few sort of blank looks. But I guess now I'm kind of one of the few people probably who did that degree who actually uses it in some way with my work, because it was, it's all kind of connected to my interest in like world cultures and stuff like that. So then I graduated from there.
It seems like it really fit into kind of where you're at now. It's really cool that you're using it.
Yeah, I think so. And also like the actual stuff that we sort of learned about was like just doing anthropology. Like I mean, it's difficult, maybe get into it a bit later, how it's kind of, there's the things that you want to write about in an ideal world, and then there's the things that you're like commissioned to write about, and it's a balancing act of doing what you're being paid to do, but then also trying to get your own voice in there and try and sort of smuggle. I always think of it as like trying to smuggle in your own interests and your own sort of viewpoints and stuff. So, yeah, but learning about anthropology is something definitely that the anthropological side of things, I always try, and it certainly informs my writing anyway. But yeah, so I graduated from that degree, and then I moved to London, and I was working for a year doing that marketing job I was talking about before. And then I decided I wanted to do a master's, and I was thinking at that point that I might go on to do a PhD or try to. But I think I was just in that mindset of like, I was working like in like a sort of, in an office environment and stuff, and thinking this isn't really for me. Maybe I'll just try and like escape into education for as long as possible, sort of thing. So yeah, I went to SOAS.
Hide until you know actually what you want to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I went to SOAS, which is the School of Oriental and African Studies, which is in London, and I did a master's in South Asian area studies. But it was within that you get to choose, what modules you want to study, and the ones that I chose were all about religion, really, or anthropology in some way. So most of them were about Buddhism and Islam actually as well. So I did that, and then I started. As you can imagine, jobs like aren't that forthcoming from having those qualifications. So, I went back to what I was doing before, and then it was after that I started getting into travel writing more.
Nice. So I kind of want to give the listeners a behind the scenes of journalism.
Uh-huh.
So can you talk to me kind of through the process of finding a story and developing that story, and kind of how that kind of works? So like cradle to grave, how does the story work?
Okay.
Like you mentioned that it can be kind of either the publisher that brings it up or that you kind of, sneak it in. Can you kind of talk us through the behind the scenes of that?
Sure. So ordinarily I'm a freelancer, so I work for various different companies, as you said. So a big part of the job is pitching ideas. So I'll have like a massive list of things that, as I'm just researching things, reading about things, I think that would be an interesting thing to write about. But there's always, it also has to fit with what the publishers are looking for at that time. So let's say with BBC, for example, every year they publish a different set of guidelines, which they send to their freelancers, saying, we're doing these series this year of different themes, and we want pitches based on those things, basically. And then for, say, National Geographic Traveller, who are the travel magazine that I write for, they have sections of a magazine, right, as most magazines do. So I can't necessarily just go in with something of like, this is an interesting idea, let me write about it. It has to be like, this is an interesting idea and it could work for this section of the magazine. What do you think, kind of thing. So I'll start with an idea, and then I'll decide whether or not which publication I think it works best for, and I'll kind of tailor that idea to that publication. And then there's a lot of at first, when you first start doing it, it's like you get really attached to these ideas because you're passionate about them, they're your things, and you think, I'd love to write about them, and I know it's a good idea. And at first you send off these pictures, and then you're constantly checking your emails and thinking, that person hasn't emailed me back yet, and it was 2 days ago or whatever. And it's like you very quickly learn that you have to get to a point where you press send, and then you completely forget about that, and you don't take it personally at all if they don't get back to you, because even when you have a relationship with them, these editors are so busy all the time, and it's a question of timing, when they have the budget for certain things, when they're looking for certain types of articles. And so you get to the point where you become a bit of a pitching machine, really, when you get into it, and you go, okay, well, that didn't get commissioned there, so I can change it a bit, and it might work for a different publication. People ask me quite often, like, who are trying to get into the industry, how do you pitch, how do you do sort of X, Y, and Z? And one of the things that I always say to them is, number one, you have to tailor it to the publication, but also just believe. You have to believe in your own ideas, because I've sometimes had things commissioned which I originally pitched literally years ago, and it wasn't right at the time for whoever, and then subsequently I've tried again and it has been commissioned. So I always think, like with anything, you need to if you think something's an interesting idea, chances are there will be people out there who will find it interesting too. So you just have to have the courage of your convictions in that regard. So then, hopefully, if it gets commissioned, then again, the next step is kind of making it happen and making it pay, because obviously, if you fly to research an article, you can rack up a massive bill if you're doing it under your own steam, sort of thing. So normally the way that
So would they kind of give you a quote or something to like say, all right, for this story, we're giving you X amount of money. And with that, you can kind of either decide to, if you have all the information you need, you just kind of stay put. Or if you need more information and to speak to different people, like historians or whatever it may be, then you kind of reach out and take from that pot, I guess.
Yeah. So that every publication is different. The way, a big part of how travel media works and how it operates is you'll work with PRs who work with tourist boards, for example, not necessarily tourist boards, but could be a company or whatever. And so, the deal is that you get coverage for a certain area or a place or in a hotel or whatever it is, and in return they host you. Or they would sometimes they do press trips. Like I was just in Japan in December on a press trip where there were 3 journalists on it, so it was quite a small one. But they showed us around various places in these 2 areas of Japan, and then, in fact, right now I'm writing 2 articles. I've done one already, but I'm writing 2 articles off the back of that trip for National Geographic Traveller. So they said, what did you experience in this trip? And I said, this is what we did, and we kind of decided how to do the articles based off that. But there's kind of a conflict there, right? Because especially if you're trying to do travel writing that is real and genuine, and you're not just trying to do marketing for a hotel, whatever it is, or a tourist board, then it becomes a bit more subtle, because sometimes places are happy to go, it's still good exposure for us, but we're obviously not expecting you to just be like this, go on about how beautiful this resort is or whatever, because for me anyway, that's not really the sort of travel writing that I do. So there's that type of article, and like I say, normally there's a bit of kind of compromise going on with that sort of thing. But then sometimes some places pay more, and it's a flat fee, but they kind of pay more in the expectation that you're going to spend some of that money on researching the article. Guidebooks kind of do it that way as well. So guidebooks have changed a little. Well, I can't speak for every company, but even since I started like 6-7 years ago, at the beginning, I think more of them were much more like, we're going to pay you more money, but as a result of that, we're expecting you to spend that money on researching the guidebook. And they weren't very keen on people doing partnerships with tourist boards, for example, because they thought that it kind of undermined the editorial integrity of the piece of the book, which you can understand
for sure. You can they'd polish the sites or the stories a bit more, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then for rough guides, for example, rough guides are known as their kind of tone is like, it's very like tell it like it is sort of thing, and it's sometimes you have license to be quite sort of quite funny in the way that you talk about place, real, and like you're not supposed to shrink away from saying if somewhere's a bit, because if you're traveling in like any country and you go to a lot of different towns and stuff, it's like, of course you're going to find places that you don't have a great experience in, you don't like that much, and you want to be honest, because your people are going to be reading this book and deciding where to go and stuff like that and how to get there. So, but now, in those past few years, I think particularly with COVID and everything that happened, there's a bit more understanding that with the amount of money that they can afford to pay now, which has been slashed in the last few years for lots of different companies, there's a bit more understanding that, okay, you might have to work with say with tourist boards or with PR sort of things, and so you're getting some stuff paid for, maybe you're getting some stuff for free, but at the same time, they will understand that you're not just going to be necessarily portraying everything as all, all sweetness and light. So there's understanding on both sides of the way that it works, and there's a lot of compromise involved. But you make it work one way or the other. There's also obviously there's another way which you can do, which there's another way of funding it, which is just to if you're going somewhere for another reason. So when I was doing guidebooks, they knew that because you're trying to kind of get this career going and make things pay, that when you're in, say, Indonesia for 2 months because you're doing a guidebook project, they know that you're going to be there collecting material which you're hoping to publish for other publications, sort of thing. So they're okay with that, and it means that you can get a flight paid for and hotels and stuff paid for, and then you can take a bit of time to research other stories, and then that's quite a sensible way of making it work. But you have to plan things, and you have to be quite sort of clever with it, because otherwise, you can hemorrhage money quite easily.
Yeah, I bet. So I guess in terms of your is there a specific piece of work that you're most proud of?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's see. The one that came to mind as soon as you said that was so I wrote a piece for BBC Travel in 2020. This was, and it was about a little town in Sussex in England, southern England, called East Grinstead, which they call it's been described as the real life answer to Twin Peaks, or the British answer to Twin Peaks, anyway. And as also it's described as the Scientology town sometimes, because for a long time it was the European or the worldwide headquarters of Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard used to live there I think it was the 1960s, and like Tom Cruise supposedly spent lockdown there in this huge manor house they have there.
Of course he does.
Yeah. And there's all sorts of funny stories about this town, like some of them to do with Scientology, like John Travolta supposedly visited and tried to book out the whole KFC in town for him and his entourage, which obviously was met with like derision and sort of confusion from them. But but then under the surface, you like dig a bit more into this town, and there's all sorts of interesting stuff beyond the Scientology connection. It kind of seems to have a certain like religious zeal to it, because it's also one of the UK bases of Mormonism is there, the LDS Church. There's like Christian Scientists, Jehovah's Witnesses. There's a very unusual number of religious organizations, including ones which you might describe as a little bit alternative or offbeat or whatever, all clustered in this very small, unassuming market town. And it's got like there's UFO sightings associated with it, and
oh shit,
sort of it's said to be like ley lines meeting there. It's very like bohemian sort of place. So it's a very interesting place, and I went there and wrote this article about it. But the reason that it came to mind I was proud of it is because it was the first kind of one that I'd written. So when COVID happened, and I was doing guidebooks up until then, and then overnight, obviously, guidebook work just fell off a cliff, basically. I was actually supposed to be going to New York for the whole of April 2020, and it was getting to March time, and like things were like, obviously COVID happened, things were starting to look a bit spicy in that regard. So, but I was like determined, because doing New York City guidebook was like a dream gig for me, because I love New York. And I was thinking, well, I'm not going to let this stupid little pandemic, whatever it is, which will probably turn out to be nothing, as I thought then.
It'll just be a weekend.
Yeah, it'll just be swine flu again. It would just be like... so I was like, well, if they're going to cancel the flight... And I was actually looking at flights. Like, you can fly Norwegian Airlines, fly really cheaply from Manchester to New York. And I was just like, I'm going to book that flight, and I'm going to go earlier so that I'm there before they cancel all the flights. And then, fast forward like literally 1 or 2 weeks, and they were sort of, digging up Central Park for mass graves and stuff. Like, it was the worst place in the world for COVID at that point. So lucky that I didn't
Yeah.
do that, and obviously we all got a bit of perspective as time went on. But so I suddenly was thinking, well, my career as a travel writer is basically over for God knows how long. But what I did was we got like grants from the government and stuff, so I had a little bit of time where I could just focus on what I wanted to do next. And so I thought, well, I'd always wanted to do more articles rather than guidebooks because it's a bit more creative, let's say. And so I just started pitching to these publications that I'd always wanted to write for, like National Geographic, BBC. And that article was the first.
Just going for
Yeah,
it.
just going for it, because I had it was this really weird time, like it was for everyone, where we were getting money and we were sitting at home, and it was like an opportunity. I had all this time. It was an opportunity to try and do something. And so, so I thought, well, I'm going to have to pivot to writing articles. So that one was the first one anyway that got commissioned, because everything had to become domestic as well. Like, most of my work was in Asia before that. But then obviously it became very UK centric. So that was, and ever since then, that's kind of the sort of work that I've been doing in terms of doing articles rather than guidebooks. So yeah, that was a turning point, that article, I'd say. So that's why I'm quite fond of that one.
Nice. So I want to go back to some journalism 101, back to the theory.
Right.
So the 4 C's of journalism are being curious, compassionate, committed, and courageous.
Okay.
So can you tell me a time where you had to be courageous in your work?
Courageous. Okay, well, when I was in Indonesia, I was... So the job that... It's quite often when they first send people on guidebook jobs, they send people to do like the most remote part of that's covered in the book. So I was doing the Indonesia chapter of a Southeast Asia guidebook, which is like a massive, thick guidebook. So it's still like... Just the Indonesia one was quite it was a lot of pages, but they didn't send me to do Bali and Lombok and the places where everyone goes and where most people who read that book are going to be reading about those ones. They sent me to do every island east of Lombok, basically, which is like the part of Indonesia which is much less touristy. And which was awesome because I think it's partly like to see if you can hack it sort of thing, and then partly also because if you can't and you fuck it up, then it doesn't really matter that much because not that many people are going to be reading those pages, I guess. But so yeah, I was doing these islands of east of Lombok, so like Sumbawa, Sulawesi, Sumba, and it was an amazing experience because you really get to like experience parts of the world that I at that point probably wouldn't have done at that time. Like I probably would have gone to Bali and the Gili Islands and Lombok and just got pissed with Aussies and Scandinavians and Canadians. But so that was amazing. But one of the islands where that was included in my sort of part of the chapter was Flores, and off the coast of Flores is Komodo National Park, where Komodo dragons live, obviously. And so it was actually on the island of an island called Rincha, which is so the dragons live on Rincha and Komodo. And we went up and we were walking around being shown. So they took you to like the visitor center. One of the things that really the first thing you notice is you would just literally be walking along and then there's just a dragon like just right there sort of thing. And they're like...
And Komodo dragons, their saliva is like super poisonous, right? Like
so
they can kill you.
They have some kind of... So they're like... I mean, they're massive. They're like 2 meters long at least, 2 or 3 meters long, I think. And, big beasts.
Fuck.
And they can run really fast. They can swim really, really fast. They have like forked tongues and like they're massive tails that they use as a weapon. They're like dinosaurs, right, basically. And yeah, they're so sort of metal, these creatures, that like as soon as they're born, they run up the nearest tree so that their own mother doesn't eat them. That's becoming coded in their DNA somehow, like through evolution. So that's the sort of things that we're dealing with. But you just walk up and they're literally like, and you're there with like a little ranger who's got literally like a wooden stick with a fork in the end. That's it. Doesn't have a gun.
Fuck, not even
Not
a
even
gun?
a gun. And yeah, so it doesn't feel like the safest thing in the world. But then you're walking along, and there was one like absolutely massive dragon that was just lying there, and he was going like, "We can get a bit closer." Like, obviously, we were all a bit wary of this, and he's like, "You can get a bit closer if you want." And we're like, "Really? Like, how close?" Like, edging for. He's like, "Yeah, go on, go on, go on." And so we were all like lining up to get photos behind this Komodo dragon, because he said that like you say, their saliva is like really toxic. So they're big, but they eat things that are like 3 times their size, like water buffalo and stuff like that. But the way they kill them is they stalk them, and then they bite them, and then they leave them, but they keep following them. And then like 2 weeks later, from all the bacteria that are in their saliva or the toxins, these animals will die, and then they just eat them. And so they'll eat like 3 times their body weight in one sitting, and then they'll just lie there in the sun for like weeks on end, just digesting it. So
Jesus
yeah,
Christ.
but the upshot of it is that I have an amazing picture which the ranger took of me like stood behind a Komodo dragon, and I'm so glad that I got it because yeah, I mean, it was a great experience, but yeah, that required a bit of courage, I would say. It's quite what's the word? It's quite counterintuitive to like inch up behind a Komodo dragon till you're like 1 meter behind it or whatever.
It's for the gram, man.
For the gram, exactly. I couldn't resist.
Did you use that photo in the story you wrote?
Well,
or in the
I think it did end up getting published somewhere. I think because I ended up writing a few things about Indonesia. I was there for like 2 months. But yeah, main motivation was definitely getting it on the gram. I didn't make it into the guidebook, unfortunately, but yeah, it's a good picture to have. It's an interesting one. Some people that I met when I was over there said that like it was one of those situations, like, you know, like the tiger temples in Thailand where they sedate them so that people can go, and which is obviously terrible. But yeah, I looked into that a bit, and I don't think that is the case with those Komodo dragons, as far as I can tell.
They're
I think
fully ready to attack.
Yeah, or at least, but they were so confident. I mean, and obviously because they know these animals so well, he was like, "No, he won't move. Trust me," because he's eaten like he ate a goat or whatever like 2 days ago, or water buffalo. So he's good. But he was kind of like moving. He was like, his tongue was like coming out of his mouth, and his eyes were sort of going a bit, and his tail was moving a bit. So it was a bit of a hairy one, but yeah. It's a funny experience.
Yeah, that sounds like a definite time where you had to be courageous.
Yeah.
There's a place that you've gone to. I think you've written about it. It's a place that I guess is, I don't know a lot of people that have gone to this place. I recently, I guess at work, we had an intern that was actually from this place. And through kind of conversations with that person, I was able to kind of get a better understanding of this country. This country is Oman.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about your travels in Oman?
Sure. Yeah. Oman. So again, I was updating a guidebook, and Oman's it's a country in the Middle East, and the countries that border it are Saudi Arabia. It's got Yemen to the south.
Yemen, yeah.
It's across the Strait of Hormuz. There's Iran. So it's in a very sort of geopolitically fraught part of the world, let's say. And Oman has acted as a peacekeeper for decades, really. And it had a renaissance, as they call it, in I think the 1970s, where at that point there was only there were 3 miles of paved roads in the whole country, sort of thing. And then now it's like on a par with, the UK or its surrounding countries in the Middle East, like the UAE or whatever. It's really, really developed.
Yep.
Because of oil money, effectively. But it has it's a benign dictatorship. So they have like a royal family who rule the roost, and the Sultan, actually, who was there when I was there, who's like there, they absolutely love him there because he oversaw the Renaissance and stuff. He died a couple of years back, I think, and it's his, I think, nephew or something now. But it's just a very chilled place. It's traditional Arabian culture, but not in the way that you'd associate with Saudi Arabia, or it's not it's obviously a conservative place, but it's not not that conservative sort of thing. So it's a lovely place. But yeah, I had quite a funny experience talking about times where, I don't know about having to be courageous, but certainly times when I was scared. So when you're updating a guidebook, you basically your job is to go to all the tourist attractions that are listed in the guidebook, so museums and as well as restaurants and bars and all that stuff. So, and get the information about them. So one of the museums that I had to go to in Muscat, which is the capital of Oman, was it's called the Sultan's Armed Forces Museum. So it's kind of a collection of like military regalia and stuff, but it's on the ground. It's actually on an army base. So you drive up. I was driving because I rented a car when I was there. So I drove up to the front, and then you have to get out of the car, and then like you have to get in another car, and the army guy has to take you like to the museum through the base. So it's quite an unusual sort of place. So I went in, did that, interesting museum, all that, took my notes and stuff. And then when I left, there was no army guy waiting to take me back. So I was just like trying to find my own way sort of thing. And must have taken a wrong turn sort of onto the army base itself. I don't even know how that was possible in terms of fences and stuff like that, where the roads went. But there you go, it happened. And so I was wandering around this army base with a massive like DSLR camera around my neck. Obviously not an Omani soldier.
The only white guy on the base.
Yeah, exactly. And so, as you can imagine, they got a bit suspicious about that, and someone came over and sort of quickly whisked me into a. I was like, "Oh, I just need to. Can you tell me how to get off the base back to the main road, sort of thing?" But he was, as you can imagine, sort of wanted to ask a few questions, sort of thing. So. I got taken into a little room, like a little porter cabin sort of thing. And they just asked me loads and loads and loads of questions, all looked through my camera and stuff. And obviously it was just pictures of like the stuff that was in the museum and all that. Nothing, no sensitive information sort of thing, no pictures of the army base or whatever. But they were asking me all these questions. And then all the time I was just thinking like, oh, what are they going to like... Are they going to find? They're going to trump something up. It's just the kind of thing that, like, you read these stories, like, particularly, I mean, sometimes in Middle Eastern countries, like, you've had, certainly we've had British nationals getting detained on, like, spying charges and stuff in places like Iran for, years and decades sometimes, when it seems to be completely without any basis. But thankfully, like I said, in Oman, they're much more sort of, they're pretty chilled people, really. So they asked me all these questions. And there was a couple of things I thought he was going to let me go, and he was like, just wait here. And then he'd go and he'd have someone else with him, and they wanted to ask me more questions. So I was in there for like hours. But then eventually he went out again and said, wait here. And then it was just a taxi driver outside waiting to give me a lift back to my hotel. So got away with that one. But yeah, every potential...
Just asking you questions like, oh, can you tell me about that Scientology town in the UK?
Yeah, well, this was back in the day before I was doing any articles, so I had nothing to... I didn't even really have anything to prove that I was, just an innocent travel writer, but I must have convinced them, so... It all nice. Turned out all right in the end.
Yeah, and just in terms of like the landscape in Oman, just having Googled like or seeing pictures from the intern that I was working with, like it's a super mountainous country.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing place for hiking, and the landscapes are absolutely beautiful. I mean, you don't really. I think lots of people, particularly if they think of Saudi and the UAE, they just think of desert, like sandy desert, sand dunes, sort of thing. But in Oman, certainly it's very rocky, and there are sandy desert. I mean, there's a famous part of Oman called, which is also part of Saudi, called the Empty Quarter, which is where there's a famous explorer, Wilfred Thesiger. He wrote a book called Arabian Sands, which is all set in that. He was traveling along that with the Bedouin people there. So it is proper, it's Lawrence of Arabia style stuff in places, but then it is also this, you get, very mountainous. There's the Jebel Akhdar, which is a mountain range, which is amazing for hiking. but then within those rocky areas, you have what they call wadis, which is like valleys, where some of them have like oases in them, and it's suddenly amazing blue water and palm trees and stuff. And yeah, but then you've also got the coast in Oman, which is got some beautiful beaches and stuff there. I went to a turtle reserve sanctuary there where get to see like turtles being baby turtles being released onto the beach and at night time, and saw turtles laying their eggs and stuff. And yeah, so it's an amazing country for the outdoors. It's kind of off the tourist radar a little bit, I think. Still,
Absolutely. I don't know many people that have either gone to Oman or talking about wanting to go to Oman. So I think that this is potentially a country that people should look into to go to, because it's, like you said, it's safe.
Yeah.
It's I think it's cool too to go to a country and not necessarily know already what you're going to see, right? Like if you're going to France, you're going to see Paris, you already know what the Eiffel Tower looks like, but like, what do you know about Oman?
Exactly. And also the other thing, obviously, if you go to France or somewhere like Venice, where I was a couple of weeks ago, like, not only do you know what you're going to see, I mean, there's always obviously places under the surface that will surprise you, especially in a big city, but there's the things that you know you're going to see, and then there's also hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of other people who are there to see the exact same things. And so, yeah, Oman is very quiet. It's like there aren't many tourists there. And I have to say, actually, of all the places that I've been sent to for work, Oman is the one that ever since I went there, I've been trying to get sent back more than anywhere else. So it's right up there. Probably there and Nepal are the two favourite places that I've ever been. So yeah, can't really praise it any more than that, really. I loved Oman.
Nice. To just kind of put a bow on Oman, I'm going to ask you the question that everybody's probably asking themselves is, how much is a beer in Oman?
Yeah, I've got to say, I mean, this, in terms of generating material for a podcast like this or a podcast like my one, Oman's probably not the best, because you can drink, but you can only drink in hotel bars. So it's like, kind of like the UAE. So I'm going to say a beer is probably, I reckon it's about £10, something like that. So it's a lot.
Okay.
You know, it's twice what you might pay in parts of the UK, but I've also paid more in other parts of the world. Like you say, like you mentioned Vegas, but you know, you can go to Ibiza, like places like Ibiza in the clubs. I mean, they charge you like €10 for a bottle of water, and then put salt in the tap water so that you can't drink it. And a beer there is like, yeah, probably like 12, 15. So yeah, it's expensive, but yeah, definitely worth going to. Maybe
you're not going there to drink in the first place.
You're not going there to drink in the first place. See it as a chance to have a bit of a detox, maybe.
It's a good detox spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to talk about a revolutionary invention.
Okay.
ChatGPT. So
Right.
For those who don't know what ChatGPT is, it's an AI chat box where essentially you can ask it to perform tasks for you. So for example, you can ask it to write you an essay on, the rise and fall of Julius Caesar.
Mm-hmm.
You can ask ChatGPT to make that essay longer. You can ask it to make it shorter. You can even ask it to grade it for you. Like, where the fuck was this when we were in school, right? You can even ask it to write and find errors in code, which is insane. Mm-hmm. So I think this is revolutionary because it's potentially going to be used to, like, as a tool to assist humans in their work, but it will also devalue and potentially take jobs. Mm-hmm. So how do you think this invention will impact journalism?
I think it and things like it, you know, other AI things will have a big impact. And I think that it kind of depends, like where people are positioning themselves as writers. I mean, journalism, definitely, like when you're talking about fact-based things, so whether it's journalism or like you mentioned, like a historical essay or something. I mean, yeah, it's hard to see past the possibility that ChatGPT and stuff like it can, it seems to be capable of doing stuff like that, or at least heading in that direction. But it's kind of a bit different. I mean, with journalism, like, because when you're dealing with stuff where the facts are already established, like the life of Julius Caesar, for example, that's a bit different from journalists effectively are finding out new information. So, I mean, what I think is I wouldn't really describe myself as a journalist. I would say travel writer, because a lot of the stuff that I do is like, the information's out there already and you're collating it in some ways. But if you're doing a guidebook, so for sure, I think unfortunately ChatGPT could probably write guidebooks. But if you're doing something where, if you're an investigative journalist and you're interviewing members of, I don't know, the cartels or something, it's hard to see how ChatGPT can do something like that.
Yeah.
And also it's like, I think sometimes, like, particularly sort of techie type people, they're like, they might say, look, you can write a song now using AI. Therefore, songwriters are going to be redundant, which just seems so like dystopian to me. But I think, like, definitely I can imagine a situation where, the songs that are being written basically according to algorithms for like the charts or whatever, they can be written by ChatGPT. But I don't think
they might already be.
Yeah, they probably are. But I don't think that's not really a gotcha to like people who are actually making like I don't think the next Bob Dylan is going to be like an AI. Do you know what I mean? There's a difference. And so if you're talking about writers, like, you can write like a factual piece using ChatGPT, or at least you can get it to do it, and then you can look at it and correct the odd thing or whatever. But I don't think like you can't have a chat. I don't think an AI could write about politics the way that Hunter S. Thompson wrote about Richard Nixon or something like that. It's just like
you'd have to feed it a lot of drugs.
You'd have to feed it all sorts. Yeah, but when you're talking about like what people who have real kind of like their own style, and you're talking about like when it's elevated to like an art form, like literary writing, I still think it's out of the reach of AI personally. But it's not to say, I mean, I think that AI is going to be really useful in a lot of ways, because it frees up. It's like with any kind of technology, right? It has to be managed the way that it will just take. Otherwise, it will just put people out of work. But hopefully, in the long term, it can be used to kind of free up time for people, and people can, maybe dedicate themselves to do stuff that is more artful or more creative or whatever. But we'll see.
Yeah, automate some of those manual things that you might do, or what I mean. Like that's where it may be. Hopefully, it stays to that. And I mean, this is obviously one version that there's probably going to be more versions as we go. But like, I would hope that it doesn't replace jobs. I'm just kind of wanted to. See how kind of it was within the industry. But I want to segue into your podcast, Hungry Ghosts.
Okay. Yeah.
So how did it come about? And also, how did you come up with the name?
Well, it came about. So I do the podcast with my mate Charlie, who's like an old friend of mine. We went to school together, in fact. And he and I were talking we're talking years ago. We were saying I would like to do a podcast. And we never quite knew what, because we've traveled a lot together, and we've had a lot of funny nights out together. We're both really into food, and so it kind of eventually coalesced into doing a podcast which was kind of about food and drink and travel and telling travel stories and stuff. But I actually was, so during COVID, when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, because for me, the goal in my career is to get to a point where I'm writing books that are my own books, but they're not like guidebooks. They're more sort of like, my own travel books sort of thing. So I had an idea to write a book about food, but it's about like food culture. So it's like the kind of insane things that people around the world do, basically in pursuit of like, when I say food culture, I mean the ways in which we use food as like either a vehicle of expression or a vehicle for mythology, or basically in some way we use it to create meaning, like rather than just eating it for nutrition and sustenance sort of thing. So why Hungry Ghost? Well, going back to the Buddhism thing, Buddhism and Hinduism as well in their mythology, there's a creature called the Hungry Ghost, which is one of the realms that you can be reborn into in like the reincarnation cycle. Is the realm of the Hungry Ghosts, and these are kind of like, if you have bad karma, you can become a hungry ghost, and they have big bellies and they're really hungry all the time, but they have knives sticking in their bellies and they have tiny little necks, so they can't eat what they want to eat. And they're always like, there's lots of colourful stories about them. Like, you know, they'll think they found some food and then they'll like grasp at it and it turns to ash, and like they look at like the things that normal people look at, like a waterfall or whatever, and then but a hungry ghost looks at it and they see like pus and blood just like cascading down it. So there's some quite vivid sort of descriptions of what it's like to be a hungry ghost. But the kind of conceit of, so I was planning on writing a book along that theme of food and culture, and I thought call it Hungry Ghost, because even though in their mythology we're kind of, a hungry ghost is like below humans, I kind of think of it as like it's a metaphor for, well, it is a metaphor for human craving and attachment and all those things. So, you know, the idea being really we are the hungry ghosts, we're all the hungry ghosts, and we walk the earth trying to like swallow meaning down into our lives through food, but also through all sorts of things, art and whatever else. So and I was trying to put this book together, and then I just realized like it just wasn't really working for some reason. I was finding it really hard to put a proposal together and stuff. So I thought, why don't we try and do this podcast that me and Charlie have been talking about doing for ages? And so I asked him if he wanted to do it, and luckily he did. He works in the alcohol industry, so he's an expert really on alcohol. Professionally and extracurricular, so recreationally, yeah. So and it just worked because, you know, we're friends and we can have this kind of, we just tend to sit and have a few drinks every episode we have. So the episodes are themed rather than so like sometimes it's themed along the lines of a country. Our first episode was Japan, so we drank sake. We just did an Italy episode. We were drinking Negronis, and then sometimes it'll be. You guys
go hard. You guys crush the bottle.
We crushed the bottle. Yeah, our second episode was about urban legends about food and drink, and so we were drinking a thing called Goldwasser, which is like kind of like Gold Flake vodka sort of thing, but it's the original version of that, gold leaf in it, because, you know, there's the urban legend that the gold flakes cut your throat, so you get drunk quick, gets into your bloodstream quicker. But because it's so easy to drink, and it's like, it just tastes like a liqueur, it's just really sweet, cinnamony. So we boshed this whole 70 cl bottle, and then we looked at it at the end, and it's 40%. So it's like spirit strength, even though it's a liqueur technically. And Christ, so that was a bit of a loose one. We actually
dark next day.
Yeah, a little bit dusty. Yeah, we had to. The next episode was about food taboo, and so the drink we were drinking was, because it's, you know, been banned over the centuries, and so after we drank the entire bottle of Goldwasser, we realized we had to set ourselves some boundaries with the absinthe episode, because if we got a big bottle, it could have been permanent.
It's gone.
Yeah. It's gone, everything's gone, too many brain cells gone, God knows what could have happened. So we had to get a smaller bottle. We had to temper ourselves a little bit, but yeah, it's been good fun doing it, and we're still very early days. We've only done we're releasing our 5th episode tomorrow, but yeah, enjoying it so far.
Nice. I was actually going to ask you about that. Can you maybe give the listeners a little bit of a preview? I understand it's about the great history's great boozers.
That's right. Yeah. So
can you maybe give us a bit of a preview?
Yeah. So our next episode is about, and I mean, there's like endless material for this, because history is just littered with mega piss artists. But so we talk about, who do we talk about? Winston Churchill, Ernest Hemingway. There's lots of writers who obviously famously were, I mean, Hunter Thompson we touched on before. You've probably read this thing, Hunter Thompson's Daily Routine. Have you come across that?
Yep.
Yeah. So we talk about that, and
he does a lot of fucking drugs.
He does a lot of gear
and drinks.
And he drinks a lot of whiskey. But
shoots a lot of guns.
Yeah. And so that's that. We kind of talk about that as a way into talking about him as a writer and how he kind of blended fact and fiction in his work and in his journalism, even, which is kind of the essence of like gonzo journalism. But and there's some great quotes in there, and just there's some good stories. We talk about how Hemingway claimed, at least, to have liberated the bar of the Ritz Hotel in Paris from the Nazis at the end of the Second World War. And yeah, just some of the, I mean, the consumption of some of these people is just insane. There's a good one, good story about Alexander the Great. Was obviously a great military leader, but turns out to be a great boozer as well. And he hosted some drinking contests, which were so severe that I think it was, I can't remember the exact number of people, but it was something like, I think it was like 29 people, like dozens of people died, including the person who won, because he drank the equivalent of 25 bottles of wine in a day. And
that's it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
The hangover itself would fucking kill you.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, there's just, I mean, endless. So we overran a bit in that episode, the one that comes out tomorrow, but just because there's so much stuff to talk about. But we definitely going to do a part 2, I think, of History's Greatest Boozers, because, yeah, there's much to discuss.
Too many to name.
Too many to name. They really are, yeah.
All right, let's get into the top 5.
Okay.
So this week we are going to be doing our top 5 grunge artists. So listeners will be able to vote for their first or their favorite of the 2 on the 2 Beers Till Takeoff Instagram page on Sunday. And before we get into this, we kind of talked about this a little bit at the top of the show, but dude, there's a shit ton of dead lead singers in grunge. If you look at like the top 5 like big bands, so you got Soundgarden, Chris Cornell died of an overdose. Stone Temple Pilots, Scott Weiland died of an overdose. Alice in Chains, Lane Stanley died. I don't remember exactly what he died from, but I know he died. Nirvana overdose. Nirvana, Kurt Cobain killed himself. What the fuck? Yeah. So I think we should protect Billy Corgan and Eddie Vedder at all costs.
At all costs, absolutely. Yeah, I know it's like we were saying. I don't know if it's. I mean, there clearly was something about Seattle at that time where it was just flooded with heroin for whatever reason, and I guess that scene kind of glamorized it a bit. That was the time of like the heroin chic thing in fashion as well, and needless to say, yeah, pretty an unhealthy thing to have glamorized. And yes, it's very sad. A lot of them gone way too soon. It goes back to that thing of like, you know, some people would say it informed the music and stuff, and could it have been the same without it? But I don't know.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. We've got some greats that have left us a little early. Mm-hmm. So listen, in terms of this, how this works, as the guest, you'll go first, and then it kind of goes into a snake draft. So you'll go first, I'll go second and third, you'll go 3, 4, and then I'll go 5, 6. That makes sense?
Yeah, sure.
Until we have 5 of our favorite grunge songs.
Okay. Cool.
So I'll give you the floor. You give us your first favorite, your favorite grunge song.
Okay, so I mean, this was a very difficult exercise, as you can imagine, as it probably was for you.
Jesus Christ.
And it's also like I was thinking, because there are a lot of bands. So I love a lot of the ones that are like the archetypal grunge bands. But then there are some as well which are kind of like they're a similar era, but they're not necessarily considered to be like a classic grunge band. So like Smashing Pumpkins are one of my favorite bands. Siamese Dream is one of my favorite albums ever, but they're not really often described as a grunge band that often. So I wasn't really quite sure if you know, where we were drawing the boundary.
I qualified them as I'm fine with cool. The wide grunge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll start us off.
Smashing Pumpkins, in my opinion, is a grunge band.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's good to know. But I'll start off with an inarguable grunge band, which is, of course, Nirvana. And I'm going to say Heart Shaped Box is my favorite Nirvana song.
Fuck.
Yeah, and I just think it's got so I played in bands when I was younger and stuff, like I said, and for some reason it's always like when you first get together and you're like getting to know each other as musicians and stuff, we always would end up playing Heart Shaped Box. And I don't know whether it's weird, like when I grew up, so I live in Manchester now, but I grew up in southwestern England, sort of in the countryside. And I don't know if it's partly because it was a bit backwards there, and because I mean grunge is really, it's way before my time. I'm pretty sure Nevermind was the number one album when I was born, actually, in 1991. But for some reason, and I don't know if it was also because like we were always really into skateboarding when we were younger, and there seemed to still be some kind of connection between the grunge bands of like 15 years before, and skateboarding. I don't know if because maybe they were the last sort of great guitar bands, because at the time it was all like new metal and stuff, which is pretty lame, really.
New metal was getting into it, like Korn, Limp Bizkit.
Yeah. And so
I think I was kind of part of that second wave as well that kind of, fell into my generation as well.
Yeah. So for whatever reason, that was still like the stuff that people listened to when we were teenagers. There was a lot of grunge, and Nirvana were I guess sort of like my first love, musically speaking. And yeah, Heart Shaped Box just seems to be, it's got everything. It's got a great like guitar line. It's got the quiet loud thing going on. Great lyrics. And it's obviously was on In Utero as well, which is my favorite Nirvana album, I'd say. I think I love they went back a bit more punky and stuff, and I mean it's sad to listen to that album because it was the last one, and Kurt obviously died, but it's a great album, and that's my favorite song on it.
Yeah, so that was my number one as well.
How was it? Okay.
So I'm gonna have to change things around here, but hey, I made there's an endless amount of songs here that we could pick from.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no winners and losers with this, because fuck, all these songs are great.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna stick on the theme of a song ending with the word box, and I'm gonna go "Man in the Box" by Alice in Chains.
Yeah.
I got a chance to see Alice in Chains a few years back, obviously not with Lane Stanley, and unreal. They're like that the Rooster album, or is it Rooster?
It's Dirt. The album's
I forget
called
the name. Dirt. Yeah, Dirt. But anyways, Rooster's on there.
Yeah.
That's a great album. I just kind of looked back. I mean, I could have picked any of these songs, but I just kind of looked back at my iTunes, and I just looked at the songs that I had listened to the most.
Yeah.
And this is the one that came up first. So Man in the Box. And then number 2, I'm gonna audible a little bit here. And since you took one of mine, I'm gonna hopefully be taking one of yours. Okay. And I'm gonna go Smashing Pumpkins' Cherub Rock.
You know what? It's funny you say that, because you haven't taken one of mine there. But just now, when I was looking over the list and I was thinking, Smashing Pumpkins going to count? And if they were going to count, I was going to say Cherub Rock, because I mean, what a tune. It's got that, like, I think one of the reasons why Smashing Pumpkins aren't always lumped in with the other with grunge bands is because it's partly, I think, because Billy Corgan's such a great guitarist, and so you have like those, like the solo on Cherub Rock is really good. The solo on Soma on Siamese Dream as well is amazing. It's like, those kind of like really like old school sort of like 70s 80s solos, they fell out of fashion a bit with grunge, and it became much more like punky and simplistic, but I just love a good guitar solo, and that song has got a really good one.
It does. And I think like Smashing Pumpkins, my evaluation of it compared to the other bands is that they're a little darker in their image.
Yeah
You know what I mean? Like some of Billy's like outfits and like just how he would kind of perform, he just kind of looked a little bit, I don't know, almost not like gothy, but like a little bit emo-y.
Definitely.
I mean, like Nirvana, you can argue that Kurt Cobain is in some of his, like how he would dress, he'd be a little darker. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's where I kind of see the connection to kind of grunge.
Yeah.
But like some of their stuff is grunge sounding. Cherub Rock maybe a more rock sounding, darker song, but it's
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like you said, the goth influence. I think definitely like people like The Cure and Bauhaus and stuff were a big influence on Smashing Pumpkins, or at least that's how I would guess that they were. So yeah, definitely there's that influence. But yeah, the riffs on Cherub Rock are like, they could be, from any like another sort of grunge band. But yeah, I think definitely like they became a bit less like the next album. Melancholy was, I think it's a bit harder to identify that as grunge, even though some of the songs are quite grungy. It's a bit more orchestral and stuff, but definitely like Cherub Rock and the rest of that album. Yeah, I'd put it as a grunge album as well, and probably my favorite one actually. Is it my turn now then?
It is, yeah. So
Okay.
you're going number 2, number 3.
Number 2, number 3. Okay. Well, funnily enough, as you mentioned, Alice in Chains, my number 2 was also from the Dirt album. Is the song Wood. As in wood, WOULD ?
Question mark, yeah.
Which obviously, like, I mean, I was kind of a bit wary of like just picking band's sort of biggest songs, or most famous songs. But I just think it's such a good song, and it really like has the, because Alice in Chains were a bit more, I'd say they had a bit of a harder edge than like some of the grunge bands. They're a bit more like metal sounding, like with the guitars and stuff.
Yep.
And but this kind of has that, but then it also is very melodic and stuff, and it's just like, it's a great tune sort of thing. So that's why I went for it. I was listening to that Dirt album again the other day, and I just think, I mean, you mentioned, like Lane Staley obviously died of a heroin overdose. I think he was like, I mean, in some ways he's one of the more like tragic stories, because I think, like, you read about what happened to him and he just totally faded away. Like, I think when they found him, they found his body and it just withered away to nothing, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I also think he's got one of the great voices in grunge, or in like of that era.
I was just going to talk about that. Like Lane Stanley, there was a video, it was like a TikTok video, and it was like the isolated vocals for Wood for Lane Stanley. Insane.
Yeah. So good.
Like,
and
fuck.
Yeah, awesome. So I think, and like some of that album, like in the context of what happened to him, it's almost like it's difficult listening, because a lot of the songs are so overtly about heroin, basically, that it's almost a bit like, it's quite sad to listen to, I think. And in fact, even Wood, I think, is about a friend of theirs who died of a heroin overdose, but it's a bit less explicitly, obviously, about that. And yeah, it's just a great song. So that was my number 2. So yeah, my number 3, I think I'd say probably a contender. We mentioned him earlier, but a contender for the, I'd say actually probably the best voice in grunge is probably Chris Cornell. And I came to Soundgarden probably a bit later than some of the other bands, but I was in Southeast Asia. I was backpacking when I was like 18 or something, and I had downloaded Super Unknown onto my like iPod Classic sort of thing, and I just remember listening to it over and over and over again, and just thinking like, God, this is like just one of the best albums I've ever heard. I remember especially like being on there. I don't know if you've ever been to like the Thai islands in Koh Phangan, but
never been to Southeast Asia.
Oh really?
Man.
Yeah.
Nope.
Oh, you got to do it if you like traveling.
Oh, I know.
If you like it,
I know.
If you like a drink,
I'm just focused on different areas.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, it's always good to have places to go to, but getting the so-called party boat, as they call it, to Koh Phangan, having been, you get on a bus for like, I think it's from Bangkok all the way to Koh Phangan. You're on a bus for like 12 hours through the night, and then you go on this boat, and it's like being on like a pilgrim ship or something. You're like sleeping on these like flea-ridden rags, and so it's just like absolutely horrible. But because they just shunt all the tourists onto like, you know, the or at least the skinflint cheap tourists like I was, onto the worst boat. But I was listening to Super Unknown and just thinking, and you know, I could have been in any situation. I wouldn't have cared. I was just in absolute heaven listening to that album. So it's a really tough one to choose. I've written down one of two. Either let me say, is one of their songs on your list as well?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm just like, fuck, is this guy so in line that he's going to steal my whole fucking list?
Right. Well, the two that I've written down are either Head Down or Fell on Black Days. So whichever one you don't have, we'll go for.
I don't have either of those. I was going to put Fell on Black Days, but I picked another one.
Okay, cool.
So which one are you going to pick?
I think I'm going to go with Head Down, because it's like, obviously Fell on Black Days was a big hit and it's a great song, but I think Head Down's a bit more obscure, and it's just got these really cool, like, it starts off like acoustic guitar riffs and just then gets really, really heavy. And I think it was written by the bassist as well, rather than Chris Cornell. But yeah, great song, great band.
I couldn't agree more. The points that you said, Chris Cornell, best voice in grunge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I make a fantasy team of different bands or of different singers in my band, that'd be my fantasy band. He'd be my lead singer, guaranteed.
Yeah.
Him or Corey Taylor. Those are my two like best singers. I think I have to piggyback off your pick and pick a Soundgarden song too before you take it. It's "Burden in My Hand."
Right. Yeah.
"Burden in My Hand" is one that I can't see. I never skip.
Yeah.
I love Chris Cornell. I love Soundgarden. Chris Cornell's like solo career too is really good.
Yeah.
He does a lot of like really good acoustic. He's got a really good acoustic album called Songbook, I believe.
Right.
Where it's just a bunch of like live acoustic performances, and they're insane, dude.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved the song that he did, the Bond song that he did as well for Casino Royale. I thought that was awesome. That song.
You Know My Name.
You Know My Name. Yeah. I thought that was a great song.
Yeah. Yeah, great song. Also, his Audio Slave stuff. I loved Audio Slave. I was a big Rage Against the Machine fan. So, like, those two together was just, like, fucking heaven on earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Chris Cornell, he actually died on the morning I graduated from university. So that was very... Like, I woke up, went to the bathroom, just kind of looked on my phone and saw that. And I was like, fuck.
Yeah, that was a really sad one. Especially when, like, when they get to a certain age and they've kind of, you feel like they've survived their youth and all that, and that you think maybe they've got through it, and then
they're gonna live forever.
Yeah, and he always he seems like such a nice guy as well, Chris Cornell. So yeah, it's like
and he had a daughter, and like it's fucking sad, dude.
Really, really sad. Yeah, I always think like Soundgarden are a bit more, because they're quite like, a lot of it's quite technical, and it's these like weird time signatures and stuff, and obviously really, really like riff based. And I always think, and also because he's a great singer, they kind of bridge the gap for me between grunge and like bands like Led Zeppelin and those sort of like classic rock bands. Yeah, great band and good choice as well. Good song choice.
Gone too soon. Yeah, listen, I feel like I have to pick a Nirvana song. But you know what? What am I going to do here? Kind of threw me off a little bit because I feel like I can't not pick a Nirvana song. I'm going to pick a song that they actually, I believe they didn't write. It's on their MTV Unplugged album.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just one that the song I play the most by Nirvana other than Man in the Box, or Heart-Shaped Box. And I'm going to go Nirvana Lake of Fire.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's that. Have you seen that Unplugged? I have, yeah, and it's obviously it's got the famous their version of Where Did You Sleep Last Night as well on it, which is obviously also a cover. But and I think The Man Who Sold the World they covered Man Who Sold the World as well. Yep.
Yeah, but yeah, Lake of Fire is a great song. I can't remember who the original is by. Is it? Let's
see what the internet says.
The Meat Puppets, apparently.
The Meat Puppets, yeah.
Yeah.
I think he says it actually in the recording.
Yeah.
At the end of it, he said, "This is the Meat Puppets." But anyways, great song. I just love that performance by Nirvana. Obviously, I could have picked a shit ton of other songs. Smells Like Teen Spirit. Could have picked some of the classics, but hey, I'm gonna go and pick an obscure one, Lake of Fire.
Good choice.
And yeah, so it's now on to you for 4 and 5.
Okay, so I'm gonna go number 4. Back to like classic indisputable grunge, and that is, I'm going to go for Even Flow by Pearl Jam.
Fuck yeah.
Because I think kind of again, like Eddie Vedder's also got, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say he's like quite as sort of impressive as a singer as Chris Cornell, but like he has like a classic rock sort of voice. And also, yeah, Pearl Jam just have that kind of, like Soundgarden, they're sort of a bit more maybe like sophisticated, if that's the right word, like musically speaking, than some of the grunge bands. Don't get me wrong, like the beauty of Nirvana is, and the power is that they're like, their songs are so simple, but they're just amazing songs, but and the energy and stuff. But yeah, I love the riffs, like Pearl Jam's sort of all these like spidery, intricate sort of guitar riffs, and I don't know what it is, like I don't know enough theory or whatever it is to put my finger on what it is, but there's just something very distinctive about Pearl Jam's sound, I think, and their songwriting, and their melodies are unusual. And yeah, Even Flow it was the first song that really loved by Pearl Jam. That whole 10 album is really good, but Even Flow is my favorite one.
Yeah. No, that's listen, Pearl Jam is undeniably, one of the big five. They're so many of their songs could be picked, right? Like there's just so many. Like there's one that I didn't pick, but I really love. Maybe not as well known as some other ones, but Elderly Woman Behind the Counter in a Small Town. Have you heard that one?
No, I haven't.
Oh man, it's a brilliant song. So it's the story of a person who's kind of stuck in a small town and then sees like kind of their high school crush come into the restaurant that they're working in the same town that they went to high school together. Yeah. And then like the person like not recognizing them because they've changed, and you know what I mean? Like they've stayed in the same place, and it's a brilliant song. Not my last pick, but it's because it's still onto you. But I just wanted to make the point of that. That's a great song. I'll send it to you after. Nice,
cool. Yeah. I like, one of the things I like as well about their Eddie Vedder's songwriting is that it's like there's a lot of like storytelling going on. Like it sounds like that one fits into that category as well. Like Jeremy, yeah, and he had like a really interesting upbringing. I think like the guy who he thought was his dad was actually his stepfather, and he didn't find out until he was like a young adult or like a teenager or whatever. And yeah, but I mean, thankfully, he's obviously one of the ones who survived it all and still going strong. But yeah. They're a great band, Pearl Jam. I
just want to stop you there just for a second, because there's something else that we need to talk about from Pearl Jam is Eddie Vedder's the soundtrack of Into the Wild. Have you heard that album?
Yeah.
That's a fucking banger.
Yeah, that is a great soundtrack, and I mean a great film.
Yeah.
Talk about like crazy fucking stories, but I mean that's crazy travel stories don't come much better than that, right? Yeah. Sadly, he couldn't come on your podcast, but
in the next life,
who knows? Yeah, podcasting evolves as a medium enough to get people beyond the grave. But amazing story, amazing film, and that is an amazing soundtrack album as well. Yeah, great show. So for my last one, I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball, as you are allowing Smashing Pumpkins.
Fuck yeah!
Because who I was going to. What? Sorry, go on.
No, there's no rules, man. Fuck, who cares?
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say was either Nearly Lost You or Dollar Bill by Screaming Trees. Because I feel like Screaming Trees get overlooked quite a lot when people talk about grunge bands. They weren't like, as big and successful, but I love Mark Lanigan's voice. I love a lot of those songs as well. And I just think like, they're just a really likable band somehow. But I'm going to do the same thing that lots of people do and overlook them now because, God, it's a tough one. I mean, Smashing Pumpkins. So the song I'm going to choose is a cover. You're talking about Nirvana covering Lake of Fire. Have you heard Smashing Pumpkins did a cover? It's like a, not acoustic, but it's like a slowed down sort of quite chilled cover of Dancing in the Moonlight by Thin Lizzy.
No.
And it's just like, such an awesome song, and we're talking about Corgan being a great guitarist. He plays like a really good like acoustic solo on it, and they just completely change the song and really make it like their own. And it's just always been one of my favorite songs to listen to it on. Like I don't know what I think it might be on Pisces Iscariot, which was like they did like a B-sides album. I think it was either on that or it was released as a B-side somewhere else. But just a great album.
I'm downloading this as we speak
song,
here.
Sorry. Yeah,
that sounds like a fucking delight.
It's awesome, and I mean it's a brilliant song. The original's a brilliant song, but I just think it's one of those rare cases where a cover sort of transcends the original. So yeah, I'll sneak that one in as well.
Absolutely, that's a banger. My number 5 is, I mean, dude, how tough was it to pick 5 songs? Like I literally have like another 8 songs that I just kind of off the cuff picked.
Yeah. And I could have just had like 5 Nirvana songs or 5 Soundgarden songs, but I tried to spread it out a little bit. But yeah, it's tough. It's a tough exercise.
Yeah. So some of the ones that didn't make my top 5, okay, I'll kind of give a couple honorable mentions. Alice in Chains, Rooster or Nutshell.
Yeah.
Temple of the Dog, Hunger Strike.
Yeah, cool. Another great supergroup.
Yeah, and obviously Pearl Jam, the song that I was telling you, Elderly Woman Behind the Counter in a Small Town. But my number 5 is going to be a band that we cannot not touch on. It's going to be STP, Stone Temple Pilots, and I'm going Plush.
Nice. Yeah, it's a classic. Absolute classic.
Yeah, I got to see them a couple years. It would have been 10, 12 years ago. And Scott Whalen was actually still alive back then. So I got to see him. He was really like fucked up when he was performing. Like he was dancing really weird. Like he was on something for sure. But it was so cool to see him. His voice obviously is iconic, and the songs are amazing. But yeah, it was kind of sad for him to also pass away.
Yeah, really sad. Yeah, and again, like you'd think he might have got to the age where you think, like, oh, he's got through it and survived. But obviously, sadly, wasn't the case. But yeah, I'm jealous he got to see them. I think they're another one like they kind of combine like great musicianship and stuff, but with like they were like some of their songs like Plush included is like they're just great pop songs sort of thing. It's a bit like Nirvana, like they just like bangers. I saw Smashing Pumpkins, and I haven't seen any of the others. Obviously, never saw Nirvana or Alice in Chains with Lane, but I saw Smashing Pumpkins at Reading Festival, and I think it was in 2007. So it was when I had started sort of going to festivals and stuff, but they were awesome. I mean, amazing live band, like really, really good musicians. But at that time, it wasn't the original like lineup. Like obviously Billy Corgan was in it, but Jimmy Chamberlain wasn't playing the drums. James Iha wasn't playing guitar. So it was a bit like, at that point, it was just a bit kind of Billy doing his own thing with some like session musicians sort of thing. So it wasn't classic Pumpkins, but it was great to see them. But yeah, what I'd give to see.
Bucket list tick off.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, but you know, not in the realm of. I mean, people who got to see Nirvana in their heyday.
Yeah, no, it was actually funny. Actually, when I went to go see STP or Stone Temple Pilots, smoking weed in the crowd, and then we were with a girl. So it was a few of my friends, and then there was like a girl from our class that we met there, and she, had a toke of the joint, and then a few minutes later, faints.
Oh no.
And then a few minutes later, the other girl that was in our group, who's probably listening to right now, who just recently became a mom, faints. And so we're now freaking out, like carrying her out. Anyways, we have her, and we're like we were in the front of the stage, so we like carried her out with security. We kind of go off to the side, no longer able to see because it was like in an arena, so we were off to the side and couldn't see the stage anymore. And of course, we hear Interstate Love Song start, and then them going to Plush, and we're like, "Fuck!"
Yeah.
And they're like medical
of all the times,
yeah. So haven't forgiven her for that, but hey, you know what? That's shit that happens at concerts. So
yeah, for sure.
So just want to give a recap, I guess, of our top 5. So Dan's is Nirvana, Heart Shaped Box, Alice in Chains, Wood, Soundgarden, Head Down, Even Flow, Pearl Jam, and then Dancing in the Moonlight by Smashing Pumpkins. My top 5 is Man in the Box by Alice in Chains, Smashing Pumpkins, Cherub Rock, Burden in My Hand by Soundgarden, Lake of Fire by Nirvana, and STP's Plush. So this will be up on Sunday. Go ahead and vote. But yeah, so listen, Dan, I just wanted to thank you, man. Thank you so much for coming on. This was a lot of fun. I feel like this music top 5 was like everything I needed. I dove right back into grunge, and yeah, this was awesome.
Yeah, no, likewise, and thanks for inviting me on. And yeah, it's great to. I mean, I'll talk at anyone who will listen about music in general, but particularly grunge, because that's where it feels like coming home when I revisit all those grunge bands, because they were, like I said, my sort of first love. So yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody check out his podcast, Hungry Ghosts, and yeah, dude, looking to have you on another point sometime. It's a lot of fun.
Nice one, that'd be great. And likewise, yeah, we'll have to get you on ours.
Absolutely, dude.
Cool. Cheers, Phil.
Thank you for listening to Two Beers Till Takeoff. Do you want free additional content or just to stay connected with the show? Then give us a follow on our social media platform. That means TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all of them. Are you in need of podcast production services, video editing, or anything in between? Then look no further than Strut Sound Productions, the official producer of the Two Beers Till Takeoff podcast. Music produced by Alex Gagne. Check out his work in our show notes. Voiceover done by Viking Leo K. See you next week on Two Beers Till Takeoff.